Hello and welcome. Thank you all for getting settled, and we'll start pretty much on time. So as people come in the room, they're welcome to join us. My name is Rachel Vincent and I'm from WestCycle. And first of all, it's my pleasure to introduce the Honourable and very delightful Mayor Alison Demott.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Alison Demott. I'm the Mayor of the City of Vincent. So wonderful to have you all here today, and hello to the people that are online as well. I want to begin by acknowledging that you're meeting on the lands, we're meeting on the lands of the Whadjuk-Noongar people, and to pay my respects to the elders past and present and to emerging leaders. And the City of Vincent recognises that we can play a key role in terms of working towards justice and reconciliation for Aboriginal people and led by Aboriginal people. I want to acknowledge some special guests that we've got here. So we're going to be joined by Councillor Nicole Wolfe, who's probably online because she's been experiencing the Rona. Councillor Georgie Carey, Councillor Michael Thomas, Councillor Peter Devereaux, and also we've got CEO of WestCycle, Wayne Bradshaw here. And we're going to be hearing from our presenters today. So we've got David MacLennan, who's the CEO of Vincent, Tim Judd, the Director of PGA Australia, and Dr. Georgia Scott and my mate Rachel Pemberton from WestCycle. So we know why today's forum is really important, because issues of speed within our roads is a fundamental issue of safety. So the stats show that approximately 1,200 people are killed and another 40,000 are seriously injured on Australian roads every year. That's extraordinary. And traffic injury is the biggest killer of Australian children under 15 and the second biggest killer of all Australians aged between 15 and 24. So this is a serious matter. So here within the City of Vincent, over many years, we as an inner city community have been asking for ways to ensure that the speeds are slowed down, and also something to prevent rat running through our suburbs. And the consistent feedback has been that 50 kilometres an hour for our local roads is simply too fast. So an action to reduce speed limits on our local roads to 40 kilometres an hour was included in our Accessible City Strategy, which was adopted by Council in May 2021. And this is a really critical part of also helping to encourage not only safer streets, but also to make it safer for people to pursue alternative forms of transport, such as cycling, or in my case, such as e-scooter riding and an e-scooter rider. So after we had a trial and there was continued advocacy, we're really pleased to be able to say that we now have approval to implement a default speed limit of 40 kilometres an hour on all local access roads. And from my perspective as a mayor, the thing that I find really interesting is that I haven't had any complaints from residents about the need. And can I tell you how unusual it is to have that? But we've had no complaints. In fact, the only complaints I'm receiving about the 40 kilometres an hour is residents want to see more signage saying that it's 40 kilometres an hour, so that it becomes the norm and that people understand that 40 kilometres an hour is what is needed within these back streets. And it is safer as a result. So the 40 kilometres an hour reducing limit makes our streets more pleasant places to walk around and easier to be able to get around for local residents. And it also is helping to encourage that all-important mode shift towards alternative forms of transport, which is really important, particularly to deal with issues of congestion within an in-city environment. And of course, the most important thing, it is helping to make our streets safe. So you're going to be able to hear today from the people who helped to make this happen. I'm really also looking forward to being able to work with Main Roads to ensure if we can also deal with those areas that come under the Main Roads jurisdiction that perhaps also need to look at slowing down. So I'm really looking forward to that very positive and proactive discussion with Main Roads as we manage to achieve that outcome, because that's something that our local residents also want as well. So great you're here. Let's see if we can get this as the standard, particularly across our inner city suburbs, but anywhere that people want it. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison. All right, couple of things for housekeeping first of all. Today's session is going to go until 12 p.m. So 12 noon. So we're going to start with presentation from CEO David MacLennan, and then we'll be joined by Tim Judd, who has done some of the evaluation and can share lots of insights about the project. A couple of other housekeeping items in terms of people online. If you can just make sure that you remain on mute throughout. But also do indicate if you're having trouble hearing, maybe raise your hand and we will adjust the microphones in the room to make sure you hear everything. Another couple of housekeeping things is if you're not familiar with the venue, the toilets are just through the door that you came in through the entrance there, and emergency exits will follow the map. So why is WestCycle hosting this event today? Well, safer streets are something that is very important to us, and our active transport manager, Dr. Georgia Scott, has developed our active transport vision, which is really about making sure streets are places that prioritise people and enable them to move around freely in a variety of ways, rather than simply being dominated by private vehicle use and so on. So we're really impressed with the work that the City of Vincent has been able to achieve here, and we're really keen to see it rolled out in more communities. So thank you all for coming along and for joining us online, and I'll now hand over to David.
Thanks, Rachel, and many thanks to WestCycle for agreeing to partner during Road Safety Week on this seminar. It's great to be able to share our story. What I really want to do is essentially just describe the story from start to where we are now and what it might look like in the future. The story started before I arrived at the City of Vincent several years ago. And as much as this is about road safety, what I would see is it's really about a story about community engagement and how the City of Vincent engages with its community on how they want their streets to look, to feel, and to operate. I'm lucky enough that we've got our consultant who helped us in our evaluation report, Tim Judd. He's going to speak a little bit more about the science of road safety and the science and evidence about vehicle speeds. I'm also lucky at the moment, I've got a non-expert who's providing me some advice about lower speed limits. My mother is in London at the moment, visiting her sister, and I'm getting lots of photos about the 20-mile-per-hour speed limits that are in place in London, and the streets are filled with pedestrians and filled with cyclists, and you can see it's getting harder and harder for cars to get through and move through London. So it's been a very positive experience having this in place in London and Oxford. I'll let Tim explain the distinction between vehicle speeds and impact and force. But I'm going to start here because it's a serious issue, which the Mayor made very clear in terms of the number of fatalities. Do your mental maths for miles per hour to kilometres per hour. And think of yourself as the red person in this graph. And think about that red person, not as yourself, but someone you know, someone you love, one of your children, friend or family member. Put the red person into your mind and think about the difference here, because it's a big difference going from 20 years ago in WA, moving from 60 kilometres per hour streets down to 50 kilometres in built-up areas, and now the City of Vincent is rolling out 40 kilometres. It is not a linear relationship. There's an exponential difference in survivability between 60 kilometres, 50 kilometres, 40 kilometres, and 30 kilometres. Exponential improvement in survivability or severity of an accident, a crash, in terms of the probability of being killed or seriously injured by a vehicle moving at 30 compared to 40 compared to 50. And 60 kilometres in our residential streets is a long time gone now. the story of how we moved from 50 kilometres, which is the standard speed in Western Australia and local roads, down to 40 over the last few years, really started from calls from our community, going back many councils ago. I'm just going to ask Milton to check the slides. Not moving now. Can you try it again?
This morning,
Oh, great.
it's bit delayed.
Okay, we're going to a bit of delay. Our community was telling us, the City of Vincent, and our council and councillors, going back about 10 years, that 50 was, or at least it felt, too fast in our residential streets. So what were we doing? We were doing what most councils have been doing and are still doing in terms of trying to address vehicle speeds. We were trying every type and variation of speed bumps you could put in a local street. We were consulting our residents on chicanes or plateaus or cul-de-sacs or no left, no right turns in or out. And every time we were consulting and talking to our community who wanted vehicle speeds to be slowed down on their street, these are the different interventions we're trying. We're trying to adjust the road width, mention the speed humps, we're looking at shared zones, how we build the medians, whether we have roundabouts, where we can put more trees in, pinch points. All these things are very well known to the traffic engineers in the room. And we're essentially running into diminishing returns from this because I think we tried every size, type and shape of speed bump that we could put into every road in the City of Vincent. They weren't popular and we'd get a lot of complaints, and every speed bump in a local road is essentially a fight with your community. What we wanted to do is do something different. All these different interventions, which involve capital works and heavy engineering, they're not just contentious with the community. You're messing around with parking space on the street. You're putting a speed bump that might make noise outside one of our residents' homes. Each one of these interventions becomes a fight or contentious with our community. We wanted to know, we wanted to see if there was a better way. We wanted to reduce the speed of cars. And we know that there's this conversation, particularly with main roads and traffic engineering experts, about the need or validity of engineering solutions to try to engineer the road through capital works to try to slow the speeds down. We're just finding this was too slow and too ineffective across the board because it's only one intervention and one capital project on one street or one speed bump on one part of the street. It wasn't giving us the impact we want for our streets. So that's when we decided or agreed with the Road Safety Commission that we'd trial a very simple idea without any engineering, without any capital works, just to simply change the sign, which says 50 kilometres per hour on our residential streets. We'll change that from 50 to 40. And we would look, we'd watch, we'd measure, and would speak to our community about what difference that made. So that's what we did in 2019. And we did that in consultation with the community. And the first results about that idea when we consulted, it wasn't overwhelming support. I'm not sure, it was a bit around about 50-50, but on the balance, council at the time was happy to go ahead with this trial in partnership with the Road Safety Commission. We said it'd be a two-year trial and we'd do an evaluation, both quantitative in terms of vehicle speeds and volumes, and qualitative in terms of the perception of residents in the area about how they felt that change from 50 to 40 impacted their street. And important when I say that all we did was change the sign from saying 50 to 40, we're also very clear because we had the WA Police with us on the working group for implementation. We were going to be doing, or the police were going to be doing, zero enforcement of that speed at 40. We were just going to change the sign. We're going to talk about it, promote it, and educate the community about the change, and then we're going to measure what happened. So the signs went up, down, 50 signs went down, 40 signs went up in our southern suburbs around Hyde Park, and we watched and waited and had a look at what happened when that occurred. It was slightly complicated for Tim, our consultant, to do that evaluation because after 2019 and before the first year occurred, it was 2020 and we had COVID and we had obviously quite big changes in vehicle movements and people moving in and around our streets and suburbs, particularly during lockdown. So that was a complicating factor, but we still thought it was going to be valid in terms of the evaluation and trial. What we were trying to do, Rachel talked about trying to move away from streets and roads which are dominated by cars. We're essentially trying to inverse the priority that we give to different user groups on our streets. Our roads have largely been built for vehicles. Most of the space on the streets are allocated to the car, including the car parking on the side of the road. And we've got narrow sidewalks on the side. And we try to squeeze into some small verges in the city of Vincent as many trees as we can. What council agreed during this trial, as we were developing our accessible city strategy, the transport strategy for the entirety of the city of Vincent, is we wanted to inverse that relationship between the users of the street and cars and put pedestrians and cyclists, active transport users. I have to keep reminding myself, no, the mayor keeps reminding, I have to keep adding here, and e-scooter riders, because our mayor is an avid e-scooter rider. So we also want to make sure there's space and priority given to public transport users. And then we also want to make sure at the bottom of that hierarchy, you can still get around in a car for those who choose to drive. The overarching theory on this, while we're talking about road safety, it's really about how we want our streets and our roads to feel and how we want them to perform for the community. We want them to feel safe. We want them to be green. We want them to be cool. We want them to be shady. We want kids to be able to walk and ride to school without parents worrying about them getting hit by a car at 50 kilometres an hour with the probability of survival that I explained in that earlier graph. So the City of Vincent want to put people first in how we design our streets. We want to make getting around the city safe, easy, and environmentally friendly. After the trial, we interviewed some of our residents and asked them how they felt and thought about the 40-kilometre trial period. And I'm just going to play a few short videos about what our residents told us.
I feel really excited and really positive about the speed limit dropping to 40 kilometres an hour. It's going to mean that everyone's safer to use the street, and hopefully it will encourage people to use other types of transport.
There's three altogether. So I'll pick the second one.
Seeing the speed limit drop makes it just so much safer for our young family going to daycare and going to play parks. It's great.
I love North Perth.
We all love North Perth, by the way.
Last one.
It's a fantastic community feeling, enhances the environment around. People can go a lot slower and say hi to each other, and cars, you know, at a more slower pace. Yeah, good move.
So we did the evaluation and looked at the evidence about the change in vehicle speeds and volumes, and also did surveys around the numbers of cyclists and pedestrians in that trial area at the 12-month mark. I'll let Tim explain that in a little bit more detail about what we found, but we did find a measurable drop in the speed limit. It was equivalent to what we'd expect after 12 months, based on the drop from 60 to 50 over 20 years ago. So we're only talking about a 1 kilometre per hour difference in the measured speed, but that is significant and it was downward, so it was positive. And the perception from our residents in the survey was that the streets did feel safer. They felt more comfortable with the speed at 40 and 50, and we could measure the amounts of pedestrians and cyclists in the streets. I'm going to hand over to Tim now to explain a little bit more about the science and the evidence, both from our trial and the trials that have occurred throughout the rest of Australia and overseas about changing our vehicle speeds. So Tim Judd from PGA. I'm just showing you the map here of the initial trial area in the pink in our southern suburbs, and now moving to the rest of our suburbs for those of you who are not familiar with the city of Vincent locality. Tim, thanks for the right.
Thank you, David. Yeah, so I've been working with the city for a number of years now on the trial. And as David alluded to, when we went back out to the community a few years ago, as it came towards the end of the trial, we asked them again, 40k now has been in for a while, what do you think about it? And what we found was it definitely did change communities' attitudes and communities' perceptions to slower, safer speeds. They were more inclined to think about walking or riding, more inclined to allow their children to go out and explore on the streets and play on the streets like we used 2 years ago. So it was definitely a successful outcome of the trial, which allowed us to put a report together on the benefits of speed management and why the city should adopt this process for all streets within Vincent. So why are we doing speed management? Well, effectively, it's a really economical way, as David has alluded to, of managing road safety when a local government has a vast local street network. As David said, you can't, there's not enough funds to retrofit every road to make it safer. There's not enough funds coming from local government or from state and federal government to put in safer cycling facilities and safer walking facilities on every single road throughout the whole of a local council area. So managing speeds, especially on local roads where people are living and playing and arriving home, hopefully arriving home safely each night, is one of the key areas that we can address to encourage people to have a more livable community. So speed management has that potential to deliver the highest injury reductions and the lowest costs when compared to more physical interventions over long term. We also know that there is research, and I'm sure people may be aware of it in the room, that there is research that does say that just putting up speed signs and doing nothing else won't bring speeds down to where we want it to be, that target speed. But there's also counter research that says that we should be looking to flip that paradigm. So some of you may know that in WA, generally the process is for lower speeds. Its main roads would look at the streets and then generally say to the local council, you need to go in there, provide physical intervention to physically reduce the speed down to where you want it, and then we'll come in and look at speed zoning that street. That takes a long time, a lot of money, and a lot of consultation with community to get through that process on a street-by-street basis. So this study and this project, we wanted to flip that paradigm and say, no, let's reduce all the posted speed limits on the local streets. Let's say to people when they're on the local streets, this is how we expect you to drive. This is how we expect you to behave when you're on the local street, whether you're a resident or whether you're visiting. And what you can do over time, once the 40k now have been in for a good number of years, they can go back and monitor the streets, speak to local residents, and just on those odd streets where we may not still be getting compliance to where we would like it to be, then we can look at maybe some additional physical interventions down the line. So it's a lot more cost effective to do it that way. And there is research to say that if you reduce speeds on a local road network on a mass scale, it does have that effect on people spread around local roads. So as the Mayor said, we may actually find, when this is implemented for a few years, but on some of the high order roads, speeds are gradually dropping on some of the high order roads as well, because that's going on sort of cognitive learning ability of just driving a bit slower in our local areas. So
Like,
we're just going to touch on the science behind why speeds are important and why we should be looking at speeds. See if it catches up. Essentially, it's kinetic energy as it boils down to, which is the transference of energy when a crash occurs. Kinetic energy is based on mass and velocity squared. Catching up. Can you move it along?
because you're still moving the slides here, I can see the thing. I will just reshare this. Give me a moment. Quickly reshare the screen. Let's try that.
Yeah. So essentially, we're just talking about science effectively, and what we know is that speed is the primary determinant of the outcome of a crash. I mean, the way I look at it is if you throw a tennis ball at someone and you just throw it to someone underarm and it bounces up, then generally it's not going to cause much damage and it'll be okay. If you put that tennis ball in a cannon and fire it at someone, the tennis balls are still the same. The mass changes slightly due to the velocity, but generally it's the speed that then hits somebody at that force can damage them, can bruise them, can break bones depending on how frail someone is. So speed is the primary determinant of what happens when a crash occurs between vehicle and vehicle or vehicle and pedestrian. I mean, we do know as well that it also depends on the type of vehicle, the angle of the crash, the vulnerability of the person in the crash, but speed is that primary determinant why that happens. So that's why speed management is very important and why we need to look at that going forward. Yeah. We also looked at this basically how do you set speed limits, or how do we set speed limits within WA and around the world? And the research showed there's generally about 4 approaches to setting the speed limits around. There's the traditional engineering approach, which looks at how people currently use the street, how they behave on the street, generally looks at data, 80 percentile speeds and the like. There's the expert systems approach, which is computer-based systems that you punch of data in, and then depending on how that system's been built by the person, it will give you the outcome of what they think the speed should be of that street. There's also the optimization approach, which is more around the societal cost of speed limits to the society of transport. So it takes into account travel time costs, vehicle operating costs, crash costs, as well as pollution and noise and the like. But it's quite heavily weighted to travel time and vehicle operating costs and vehicle impact. And then there's the harm minimization or safe system approach, which really understands that we know that crashes happen, we know that crashes happen at a certain type, the outcome can be quite severe at certain speeds, and we know that the human tolerance to withstand that energy and that transference of energy during a crash can lead to someone being fatally injured, being seriously injured or fatally killed within a crash. So we need to move away generally from that engineering traditional approach and start using safe system and harm minimization as how we set speeds. And the reason why we need to move away from that is because there's a number of research been done over the years of a phenomenon called evolution of speed. And really what that does and what that looks at is it says that over time, if you leave a street as it is and motorists as they are, the 85th percentile measure that the traditional engineering approach takes will gradually come up over time. And we think that through 3 different ways. Potentially it's because most drivers will tend to try and drive at or just above the speed limit or quite way over the speed limit. Many drivers seem to drive faster at the average speed as an effort of sort of self-affirming themselves. And also generally traffic lanes become wider over time, are becoming wider over time, and that's inducing travel speeds as well. So all this data and all this evidence leads us to understand that we've got to manage our local network through speed management, and that speed management has to be low. Part of the project as well, we also looked at the community acceptance as well. And we do know through various different researches around and various different surveys that have gone on that there is general community acceptance in Australia for safer communities, slower speeds, more trees, more walkable, livable areas for people to live in. And that was evident from the surveys that we did within Vincent as well, of people within the trial areas. We also touched on a number of case studies as well. I've only picked on a couple here for the presentation. The reports that we put together had many more case studies, even outside of the report we put together, we also looked at many more case studies as well. For this one here, the Asia Pacific Society for Physical Activity, in partnership with We Ride Australia and 13 other organisations, Tepi in the room was lead on this project as well. And one of the 3 transport priorities that we had for this project was lowering default speed limits, because they knew, they looked at the research through this ask to the federal government, that if we lower the default speed limit on our local roads, we'll have more amenable, safer communities for everyone. And we're talking local residential streets, schools, and shopping streets. A number of you may be aware of Healthy Streets as well, which is a design approach that's recently, the last couple of years, come into Australia from the UK. And that has a design check tool that you can go out and actually physically measure the healthiness of the street. And within that tool, one of the indicators that we look at, and one of the parameters to least be indicated, is 85th percentile speeds. And within that Health Streets design check tool, if you have an 85th percentile speed above 50 km/h on your street, then you get a 0 score. If you can work towards lowering that speed to the 40s or even the 30s, then you get improvement in score and ultimately an improvement to how people use the street and the safety benefits of the street. And then another couple of cases as well. There was the Adby experiment, neighbourhood streets, which I led on, which looked at lowering speeds within a suburb and what impact that has on travel times. And then there's also a paper in the Australian College of Road Safety that looked at an example suburb in Sydney as well. And both of these papers really explored the impact of travel time that a lot of people push back on, that if we lower speeds, it's going to increase travel time, therefore they're going to be more likely to have a crash because they're travelling long distances, the same distance at slower speeds. These papers found that that's not the case, and that's never the case. And in fact, we know that within a journey, if you're travelling at 30 km/h or 40 km/h within local residence areas, and then you go onto a higher order 50 or 60 km/h roads, and then you get onto your freeway, and then you finish your journey, the time you're spending on your local road network at the start of your journey or at the end of your journey is minuscule compared to the full journey length that you're taking. But again, as we've touched on, the safety benefits are a lot more enormous to having slower speeds. So both studies found that the impact on travel speeds was something that we don't have to worry about. They also pointed out, especially the Australian College of Road Safety paper also pointed out that if we're going to do speed management and we're going to do lower speeds on our local street network, safer speeds on our local street network, we need 3 things to get that done. We need political will, we need societal will, and we need the financial backing to get it done. A lot of the research that I looked at and a lot of the advocacy that's been done is really, really good, but it just advocates for it in theory, and we very rarely see these things happen in practice because one of the 3 things fails. We don't have political backing, we don't have financial backing to roll speed management out on a vast scale, or the society haven't, the local residents haven't been brought on the journey to allow it to happen and be happy for it to happen. Vincent did that, and that was the great thing. That's exactly what the College of Road Safety research paper says. They had the political will, they looked at the evidence, they wrote it in strategies, they said, this is what we're going to do, we know this will benefit our community. And that allowed them to put the financial backing in the capital programme to take the project forward, have it reported on, to work with Main Roads to fund the signage that goes out for the speed areas. And they also work with the community along the way as well to bring them on the journey, to get them to understand and advocate within their peers why we should be looking at speeds. So it really shows that if you have those three things together, that you can get it done on the ground, and we don't have to just keep talking about it in theory. And then lastly, we did do some travel time runs within the trial area as part of the project, just to allay any fears to the local residents that if we roll 40k an hour on all the local streets out on, within the entire Vincent, that things aren't going to end and you're not going to have to drive and have more time driving. So we looked at the centre of the study area and how long it took to drive out from the study area to a higher order roads, 50 or 60k an hour road, to then continue on your journey. These lengths were 400, 500 metres in length, and we drove it at 50k an hour, 30k an hour, and 40k an hour. And the difference in time on the local roads was 20 seconds, 30 seconds. It's obviously vastly impacted on intersections, and some days you go through an intersection, sometimes you wait because someone's crossing. So again, it just showed that it has negative impact on journey time to slow the speeds down, but it has a greater safety impact. One of the things all this is spoke to as well is 30k an hour and 30 an hour being that safe speed. I'm sure some of you are probably thinking, well, why aren't we doing that? Potentially that's a step too far for main roads at the moment to take that on local roads, and so 40k an hour is that step towards safer speeds on all local roads. And what we have also suggested in the report is potentially city could start looking at maybe 30k an hour in those more concentrated areas of pedestrians, so maybe shopping strips or around schools, which would then allow us to have 40k on all the local roads and 30k around those real condensed areas of people and children. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. I'll let you catch your breath. And you've got some water there if you'd like it. So thank you both for that really interesting presentation. I'm going to throw to panel, Georgia Scott to facilitate our panel discussion. I just wanted to say, then we're going to invite questions from the floor. That includes from people who are participating online. So I invite you, if you're online, to type your questions into the chat function and we will relay them to the panel for you. So just if it's to a particular individual, let us know, but otherwise we will feed those through. So, and the other thing I need to mention is that the webinar aspect is being recorded today. So just so that you're aware, this might be shared on YouTube later for those that weren't able to make it. So thank you very much.
Hi everyone. So I do that transport stuff at work. This is great because I actually got a chance to ask my go to everyone else. Thank you both for telling us. I have a few questions. I guess the one that's sort of at the top for me first, bit of a crunchy one, and that is around the chosen speed limit. I don't know which one of you want to handle it. You're the science guy. Why 40 and not 30, given that's what all those graphs say?
I think it's
and also the state road strategy and all the rest, and also to add to the question, why do you think main roads are more comfortable with 40 and not 30, given you said it's like 20 seconds?
I'm just going to cut in quickly.
Oh,
before
yeah.
Tim explains.
Go for it.
His reports online, Tim was telling us 30, the data and evidence says 30.
Yep.
But he nuanced the recommendations of the evaluation trial and also accepting that, talking about needing community support, political support, stakeholder support. 50 down to 30 was going to be that's a massive jump. It took 20 years, or it took many years for vehicles to slow down from 60 to 50 when that change took place. So it's a change in people's behaviour, and a 50 to 30 was going to be a big drop. But Tim was actively advising us around the science and data for 30 rather than 40.
I have no doubt.
And it came back to, I guess, sort of reality as well. We weren't going to get 30. We just knew that, like main roads weren't going to go for that, and potentially a bigger portion of the community potentially could push back on the acceptance of that as well. So it's like, well, we need to do something. rather than try and jump from where we are, the panacea and utopia of 30, let's have a progressive change and show that the impact is negligible, show that it's not an issue, and then keep working. And then maybe we can get 30 around areas, the parks or the schools or the shopping strips or something like that, and gradually introduce it that way, introduce the idea to the residents that way. You say why main road's not sort of why we're reluctant on 30, they were reluctant on 40 as well. It was the trial that proved to them that 40 isn't the end of the world for the network, and therefore, and then even the rollout along local roads still took a while to convince them, but now they're on board and go forward.
Is the concern about the impacts on basically traffic flows and congestion? Is that
Potentially part of it, but I think it's also enforcement. I think they were just worried that people will just ignore it and will just drive at 40 or 45 and nowhere near 30, and therefore the residents would then get annoyed and get angry at the local council, and it was perpetuate an issue and end up being scrapped as well. So I think it was an enforcement thing as well. Because the research does show if it is 15, you suddenly put a 30 sign and you don't do anything else, you'll get some compliance, but the majority probably won't comply as well. And it might be the case with 40, but what we all, like I say, what the research also shows is people in a big city that might be driving 55 or 60 because they want to break the rule. Now at 40 might drive 45 or 50. So even though they're not driving 40, they've still dropped 5 or 10 kilometers an hour in their speed as well, and they're the higher end speed. So if they're doing it, then more compliance to do it as well, and that is proven on many streets around in Auckland and in the peninsula down in Melbourne and the like as well. So
yeah, so that was an interesting point about people affirming their kind of sense of
probably males,
Just to clarify, London at 20 miles per hour. To clarify, that converts to 33 kilometers per hour.
Yeah.
33.
Yeah.
So London's not 30 kilometers per hour; it's 33.
Yeah.
In one of the most heavily populated cities in Europe.
Also costs you a lot of money to drive in London.
yeah. Do you have any advice for people working in local government having those conversations with main roads about dropping speeds, or like what's the best kind of approach to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for local government now. Main roads are more amenable now to speak about 40k an hour. I think they're actively having discussions with local government now on 40k an hour. I'm working with David and the other in the city local governments at the moment to see how we can get 40k an hour on the local streets of all the inner city local governments as well. So yeah, it's definitely a conversation that can be had now, a bit more open as well. Yeah.
And for me, like anything in terms of changing public policy in government, this was what governments say that they're for and what ministers and politicians say they're for, which is evidence-based policy making. So the trial was, I chaired the working group, which had all the state government stakeholders in terms of main roads, Road Safety Commission, WA Police, and our external stakeholders with WALGA and RAC. We're all around the table talking about the implementation, timing, the signage, the cost, and then also the information piece as well. So all the relevant agencies and our external stakeholders were in the committee room next door talking about this, and the Road Safety Commission was supporting it by funding, in this case, funding Tim's evaluation report, so we could provide the evidence, provide the evaluation, provide the science and the community feedback to main roads at the end of the 12-month and 2-year period.
I just want to say congratulations. This is something that's life-saving. So to take this leadership as the City of Vincent, it's fantastic. So my question with that is, how are you going to share with other councils and local governments in the area how you've gone about this? So I think it'd be great to see it go wider.
Well, we're talking about it today, so congratulations to WestCycle as part of Road Safety Week to promote and help us share the story. The balance of the City of Vincent, because we have continued that trial there in our southern suburbs, the signs are only changing right at the moment. So our contractors out taking down the 50s and putting up the 40s in the balance of our local roads and streets. The City of Vincent is part of the Perth Inner City Group, which comprises 5 local government areas, including the town of Victoria Park, City of South Perth, City of Subiaco, and City of Perth. And we're talking, and I've spoken to the Road Safety Commissioner about potentially extending this 40-kilometre area, which is in the inner city, because part of the success of our trial is we are in a city where hard up against the CBD, and we've got older and narrower and smaller and more congested roads. It might be a little bit more difficult out in the newer suburbs where the roads are bigger and wider, more free flowing, and they've probably been designed back in the day for 60 and 50. Our roads weren't designed for cars at all. There weren't cars when our streets first went in. So they are narrower, they are tighter because we are in a city. So it might make sense. And what we're talking about is potentially expanding this to have an inner city speed zone in the first instance. But it is gradual, it's evidence-based, we're doing it one step at a time, and we're doing it in partnership both with the community and the relevant state government and external stakeholders.
Kind of related to that, and I'm going to go to you next, Peter. You've done some work with regional councils around lowering speed limits in their town centres to 40.
Yeah.
Has there been much of a difference between people who live in the city and people who live in the country around dropping these speeds? Or even just between the councils?
Yeah, there has been. I think at an officer level, some of the regional councils are on board with it and see the benefit of the whole scale speed limit changes than having to apply every year for, especially with regional councils, they don't have hardly any funding internally, so they have to apply for all the grants funding going. But politically, and I think even with societal, with a lot of the local residents as well, it's a bit more challenging, I think, in terms of just getting them on board and getting them to understand why it is a benefit. But I think, you know, we can have case studies like Vincent, hopefully the inner city area to show how it will work. And there is, hopefully, fingers crossed, I think it's public knowledge, is there a safer speed trial going to occur down in the southwest from Busselton all the way to Augusta, all roads within that southwest area. Hopefully that will be up and running this year, 3 years, reducing speeds in that area as well. So that will show and be a good case study for regional areas as well.
Peter.
Thanks so much. I agree with the thought of, you know, congratulations. It's really exciting to hear this initiative. I'm on the council at the town of Vic Park. We're part of the inner city group, so it was really exciting recently to hear that there's talk around the inner city group of thinking about this broad scale. So I think it's really massive. I really love the emphasis on how cost effective it is as well compared to individual capital things, projects that are so expensive and so slow. So disruptive. So it's a really nice holistic thing. There was a mention of early on about data on active transport, people walking, people cycling, people, even mayors using e-scooters. And I wonder how you are collecting that data. Because I know in Vic Park we find, we've got lots of great data on cars, but pedestrians and cyclists and e-scooters, we've got almost none, and it's really hard to collect. So I'd love to know how you did collect it, and to what extent you think once you have more data, and did you have any data from the trial that actually gave you the sense of, these active transport users are also increasing, which is a more positive message in a sense, and at one level makes people think maybe, for a short trip, I won't get in the car because it's just as effective to walk, really, because I'm going to be driving slow anyway. So any thoughts on any of those things? I appreciate it.
Well, for the trial, it was surveys with the residents. That was the main way of getting that data. Was, are you now the trial's been in for 3 or 4 years? Are you more likely to think about walking and riding, or your children walking and riding to school? Do you drive less? Those sort of questions were asked during the survey, during the trials, or coming toward the end of the trial. In terms of ongoing since then, I'm not sure. I think as part of the active city strategy with the city has, I think there's probably a monitoring program as part of that anyway in terms of mode share. I would assume with most sort of integrated transport strategies, there's like a mode share target sort of review ongoing and things, and then obviously every 4 years there'll be the census data as well, which allows time for things to settle down, speed limits to come in and settle down, people to change habits and things. So that will be a good test as well, see if people are walking and riding more during that. Well,
Yeah, our accessible city strategy has mode shift targets away from single person, single vehicle movements towards active transport to walking, cycling and e-scooters. Now we're talking about e-scooters more recently. And we did do some counts actually on the site. So we counted the number of pedestrian cyclists at the 12-month mark. So that was a physical count, but as well as the perception of residents was really important. I just saw there's a question on the screen about what would you do differently? Any tips on what to avoid for other local governments looking to follow your lead? Well, like I sort of started talking about when I did my presentation, like anything in local government or in government, it starts with your community. It starts with engaging your community. This is not the sort of thing that council could have done against the community or to the community. We did this in response to the community. So council and local governments need to be talking to their community about what they want their streets to look and feel like, and see how they can respond to that in a holistic way. It's not any one thing. Our accessible city strategy, our public health plan has multiple different actions and targets, all built around the idea of making our streets greener, cooler, more friendly, safer places for people to move around, to live and to play.
Can I just ask a follow-up on behalf of people online, and I'll conflate two questions that have come through. So from Sebastian Davies-Slate and Daniel. So what's next for addressing sort of speed management in the city of Vincent? And with that, there's been a suggestion about painting, you know, like 40 on the road, rather than just having signs, or going to the other extreme of the safe active streets kind of model. So what's next, and would you consider painting on the road?
So City of Vincent, we had the first safe active street done in conjunction with the Department of Transport on Shakespeare Street. Anyone want to visit, and after the seminar can go for a walk or a cycle up Shakespeare Street, just behind our building here, which has the chicanes, but I don't think there was any spare change out of $1 million for that one street. We can changing all our street signs is half of that for every single street, every local street in the city of Vincent. So going back to that point, dollar for dollar, for dollar spent for impact for road safety and improving the sense and feel and character of our streets, this is the best thing we've done as a single intervention. Our accessible city strategy, our transport strategy for the entirety of the city of Vincent covers every single other thing you could expect these sort of things do. We're still doing our black spots around those high crash areas, and we're still doing safe active streets with another project around Norfolk Street. We've got our public health plan, encouraging people to be more active, to use public transport, active transport wherever possible. And we continue to try to encourage our residents to feel like that they don't just live on the street, but the street is theirs and it's theirs for the community. So the other thing which we've done, which has been extremely popular with zero complaints, is our safe streets policy, where we allow residents to attach things like swings and play equipment to our street trees. So our streets and our footpaths aren't places just to move, but are places for families to go out and share and get to know their neighbours. And that's been incredibly popular, and we're continuing with that moving forward as well.
Just comment on the painting of the 40 on the road. And I could be wrong, so if anyone knows different, please let me know. But I think there's a potential issue with main roads of having 40 painted on the road rather than a sign in terms of legally enforceable. for enforcing the speeds and that sort of thing. But I think the signs are more regulatory enforceable, but the pavement markers potentially aren't. I'm not quite sure. But I think the mayor touched on when I was talking earlier that there is a desire for community to probably have a few more signs around to remind them that when they're in the 40k/h areas, and they come out of the house in the morning and they forget that it's 40 and not 50, maybe we could have a few more things on the ground just as reminders. They're not legally enforceable, but it will remind people you're in a 40 area potentially. But again, I think one thing that maybe is worth noting is this has all been funded by the City of Vincent in terms of rolling this out on all local roads. So for any other local governments looking to do it, which I hope they are, it does require funding from the local government. MacRoads have said that they're happy to talk about it and prove it and go through the process, but they don't have the funding for it. So.
Do you know what the cost was from the folks for doing the area?
The first trial area to change the signs. Can't remember exactly what the bill was, but it was less than $200,000. I think it was around about $100,000 for the trial area, and I'm half looking at the director of infrastructure at the back of the room, but it's about $300,000 or $400,000
Probably around 450 for the signage to go in.
for the rest of the city.
Right, so it's less than a safe active street then. Yeah, okay.
So I had a question probably on that sort of the funding side of things. Do you know what Main Road's appetite is if you were to put it as a black spot application to treat effectively each intersection? Because I've done the sums for it. Your ECR is ridiculously high for it, but I don't know whether they.
I don't think it is. I don't think the speed intervention on its own, speed limit change on its own qualifies for the black spot.
Well, it's a treatment.
Yeah, but I don't think they.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't know, but I don't know. Maybe thinking about putting an application in just.
Yeah, maybe. But now there's more appetite. Maybe they'll do it more. No, there hasn't. So they wouldn't do it.
So it's like BCR's like even at $600,000, the BCR's like 15.
Yeah.
On because there's like 580 crashes.
Yeah.
So in a bounded area. So
yeah, that's what they're doing.
I just didn't know whether you knew if Main Roads have an appetite.
Well, I just know in the past they haven't.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Well, I think the black spots program, you have to prove and demonstrate that the engineering intervention will ameliorate or reduce or eliminate particular types of crashes. What we've done.
That's the thing, our streets are effectively, they've got all the interventions in place and everything's already at 40 Ks. It's just and we asked Main Roads and they said, well, if you've got $600,000, we can do it. We're like, well, we get funding. Yeah. We're trying to find, not to fund it. So.
And my name's Dudley, I'm a local resident. I think David mentioned about evidence-based decision-making. So the first thing I did when I got the GHD report, which was the first report, 2020, was look at the statistics. And I searched for the word statistically significant. I couldn't find it. And it's because, as David said, the speeds dropped only by about a kilometre. Of the 11 streets that they measured, only 2 came close to 40k, and one of them didn't change over the whole trial. I think GHD also mentioned, as David mentioned, COVID probably was a factor. They couldn't discount it. Their suggestion was complementary street design, road user awareness, and enforcement may result in greater benefits in this trial. Tim wrote a very good report at the end of the trial. He and his colleague, Cameron. It was a very well-structured report with all these great case studies, and I'd recommend that people look at them as those case studies. The first recommendation that Tim actually made was implement an area-wide 30k speed zone. The council didn't take that on board. The staff didn't even acknowledge the report. So my question, and there was also reference about needing political backing behind this. So my question is, when will we likely see the first 30k trial? Because at the moment, it's essentially we're just managing perceptions. All that trial showed is the world didn't end when the science changed to 40k's. Behaviour didn't change. I have a visitor who comes every week from Subiaco. She has no idea what the speed limit is in my street. So it was just about people feeling safer on the street but not being safer. So when do you think we'd have a first trial?
She created it.
Actually show that it is safer and it didn't end the world, that the travel time hasn't increased by more than 20 seconds.
Can help even.
think we've got one person off mute, I think, David Beattie. A great question. We're literally in the process of changing the signs from 50 to 40 now. And again, that's going to take some time to bed down and people to adjust and get used to that. And then for that to become the accepted default on our local roads. We do have 30-kilometre zones through parts of our town centres where when we get to 30 Ks, we're essentially talking what would either a 20 or 30 K zone would be like a shared street. City of Perth have those shared zones, which is not cars or pedestrians, but essentially a shared area, because once you're down to 20-kilometre shared zone, where the cars can only move 20 kilometres, that's very safe for the cars and the cyclists and the vulnerable road users and the e-scooter riders to intermingle. I think we'll need to wait for the 40-kilometre signs to bed in, for that to become the new normal in the city of Vincent and for our residents. And based on the experience, that'll take a few years before we consider going to that next step around 30. But that was an active conversation I had with Tim around the recommendations, about how it's phrased. I didn't dispute anything about Tim's recommendation based on the international studies, the data and the science. It's obvious. It's not being disputed. It's not being disputed by the city of Vincent. 30 kilometres is much, much safer than 40 kilometres. But we think we've taken a very positive and significant step in the right direction going from 50 to 40. But I'll let Tim comment on that as well.
Yeah, I just don't think 30 would have got in at all. We would have just been left with default 50, and 30 just wouldn't have got, I believe, main roads back in. I think, like I say, a larger portion of the general public probably would have taken more convincing forward as well, and would have just delayed that whole thing. But in terms of going forward, I mean, I think Vincent has one of the local councils that has the most 30k an hour sort of areas in it. Maybe not most, but has a lot of 30k, the safe active streets, the town centres and things. So again, one of the recommendations in the report is to maybe look at 30k around other pockets as well. So other little town centre strips and other sort of school areas and that sort of thing. So again, but these all take a lot of time and a lot of convincing with stakeholders to get them across the line. I think they're probably the ones to go for while the 40 settles down, and then see if we can revisit for 30 on local streets down the line.
And can I just ask, sorry, just on behalf of somebody online, about enforcement. So can you speak a little bit to A, why the enforcement was not originally done, and will it be enforced, the new speeds be enforced going forward?
Good question. Part of the trial and evaluation, because we wanted to prove the test of the trial was, what happens if you just change the sign without the police out there handing out speeding fines for anybody a little bit above 40 kilometres? That's a resourcing thing as well, and that's a prioritisation from the police about what the highest risk areas are for enforcement. So we didn't push and we didn't have a concern on that, because we wanted to test the point and trial and evaluate that point of that one move from 50 to 40 on the signage, and see what happened in terms of the evaluation. Like a lot of things that we're doing when we first make the change, we're going to need to allow the signs to be put in. They're only going up now, and for that to settle in. If we see particular streets where where there's speeding that we're not comfortable with, because we do monitor and track this, that's when we might have discussion with the police. But that's not going to be the day after the sign goes in today, that you're going to have police out on the street handing out speeding fines for anyone above 1 kilometre, above 40 kilometres, for instance. So again, this is about changing everyone's behaviour, changing people's perception of what a normal and safe speed is. It's not about handing out as many speeding fines as possible in any one particular street. This is about a whole of community, whole of city change in how we think and approach our streets, but for everyone, not just the cars going through them.
That's a good question.
Oh, thanks for that. My name's Kerry Bean. I'm a resident of Vincent, and I live in Roy Street.
Royal,
Roy.
Roy,
R-O-Y.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, Roy Street is one street east of Beaufort Street. Entrance to Roy Street is Beaufort Street. The last couple of years, no right-hand turn has been put on the Beaufort Street intersection. The reason I'm addressing this is because we have a nice sign. There's 40. There's also one Beaufort Street section away from it's 40. But people coming east Beaufort Street, there's a queue of cars waiting to turn left. Both the street, straight down the street, turn right above the street into Roy Street, into Beaufort Street. At peak hour, I don't recommend you bring your children in that, not that you had right up and down Roy Street, because it's our perception. Notice a lot of the surveys are done on perceptions. It's our perception. We sit on our front veranda here, past one, whatever. Sometimes we can't talk to each other because boom, boom. And there's no penalty for these people. And I guarantee most of them are from outside the area. The point that somebody made about monitoring and police or penalties is a good one. You don't have to have a policeman there. You can have 3 or 4 of those battery signs with a smiley face. Stick it down the end of the street. Somebody's speeding and picks them up and says, "Oh, I don't think that would be all that expensive because you could change them street to street, street to street." The other problem we've got, and it's a problem specific to Wood Street. You've got Forest Street and other streets where there's no entry. And I think Curtis Street, Gerald Street, Wood Street should be the same. Now, I haven't spoken to other residents, but the thing is, you've got people coming from the west along Walcott Street, no right-hand turn available, straight through, they're in the right-hand lane, they stop, they indicate waiting for peak hour traffic to go past, go into Roy Street so they can take the shortcut. What happens is you have up to 10 or 15 cars backed up behind that.
Have you got a question?
Yeah.
Just we're needing to wrap it up. So if you've got a question, please get to it.
It's pointless asking a question if there's no background. Okay, so how is the council going to address those 5–10% income areas that have got these problems? Because I've raised it with council through your website, no response.
That we'll look at it. The responsible director has just taken down all the details on that. This change is not going to stop rat running through City Vincent streets. It's not going to stop that. What we're trying to do, the approach is what we're trying to do is reduce the speed limit on those local roads. The main roads distributors will become a better option for people to move through because we'll slowly over time make it harder and harder and more difficult and slower to do this rat running. There will still be some particular streets like yours, which are adjacent to those distributors, where the limits must be 50 or up to 60, depending on which one it is, where we will probably have to do engineering interventions and it's a safety area like the that spot project, for instance. So we've got your details on that one. We know that this is not solving all our problems in terms of rat running and traffic safety. This is just a positive step in the right direction.
Can I just ask one last question on behalf of online, and that is around what would you recommend to community members out there in other local government areas who would like to see their council implement this sort of change? What tips or advice can you give for them?
That's easy. Speak to your council. Speak to your councillors. The council led this. The community residents, councillors, former councillors speak to the elected members of the council, and they create the environment in which these ideas are supported, and we can spend a lot of time and effort because it becomes a project, and then the council endorses it. We've got a live project, we go about implementing it. So this is driven by council, supported by the elected members of the council. Council prioritises this project over the hundreds of other things that you can spend your time and money on. For us personally, in terms of the staff, we were very pleased to do this project and instead of spending the last 3 or 4 years trying to get another speed bump into one street outside of one person's house and having a fight about it.
I'd just say you need 3 things. So if they have community support, then you need political support. If they have that, then there'll be funding will be allocated in budgets to then take that forward. So you need those 3 things.
Yeah, true. And on that, would you suggest a petition is a good way to kind of demonstrate, be able to demonstrate that community support? Is that a useful tool? Yeah.
Yeah.
I just know when I was on council, if a petition came, then you'd generally be able to get some action on it.
That there is amounts of people
Yeah.
at least.
I'll just chip in to say there's an organisation, WestCycle, there's also Better Streets, which is a national organisation. Community members can band together. There's resources on these websites to support residents to advocate for better streets.
There's also the town teams, the Safer Speeds, Better Places toolkit as well. Which,
I was going to mention that, and that's in the chat for those who are reading that. Excellent, thank you. I'm just conscious of time, and for those who need us to finish on time, I'm really sorry because we've gone 12 minutes over. But if you're all right, I'll wrap us up now and just say thank you so much to everybody for coming along. I'd also like to acknowledge the partners we worked with to pull this together, which was Walga, who helped make sure that people who are in local government heard about this, which was great. And of course the City of Vincent. And Tim, thank you for coming. I've got a small WestCycle gift pack. I hope you're riders, because these are really handy little kits if you like to get out on your bike. And thank you, Georgia, for facilitating the discussion. And thank you to Eamon for working with me to pull it all together. So much appreciated. And there's some refreshments at the back if you'd like to continue to have a chat informally. Thank you.